So it seems like everybody's here right now.
Yeah, we got everybody here.
Cool. So I think we can start like a little bit. So yeah, guys, tell us and the whiteheads here in our chat about your project and about the boost that is going on.
Yeah. So this project is VE ALCX, which is the tokenomics upgrade for ALCX to a vote escrowed system. We have taken a lot of the familiar elements from systems, especially like Velodrome or Curve or whatnot, and we've added a couple of our own flavors to it. Today we have myself. I'm kind of just the chief cat herder at Alchemix, so I just help make sure people know what we're working on and everything. We have Scoopy, who does the VE ALCX front end, and also is a man of many hats, but specifically for this is focused on the front end. And then Scrub and Toyvo are two of our Solidity devs. And then we have a couple other Alchemix team members listening in. And then when you're answering questions throughout the competition, you'll mostly be hearing from myself, Scrub, Scoopy, maybe a little bit of Toyvo here and there. And then we have another Solidity dev named Will who will be assisting as well.
Cool, that's awesome. That's awesome, and it seems that the boost and the analysis that the whiteheads will perform will be interesting both for whiteheads and for you in terms of the results, of course.
Yeah, definitely. And this is like entirely separate from the main Alchemix code base, so it's totally new stuff, which is cool.
Cool. So, well, maybe you can go maybe you can show us the walkthrough of the code base.
Yeah, so I'll do kind of a broad overview and talk about some of the specific functionalities. And then at the end, I'll hand it off to Toyvo to talk about a few of the specific contracts themselves. To do it, let's go to this. So we have a test net for this front end that we may be able to share, although I don't know how applicable it is, but it's a nice way to kind of show what this code is supposed to do. So for anyone unfamiliar, a vote escrowed tokenomic system typically means that you're locking a token in exchange for some voting power, and that voting power is used to vote on proposals as well as gauge voting. And gauge voting essentially sends emissions to different places. Then in return for the locking, you get rewards like protocol revenue, emissions, other things like that. So VE ALCX is pretty similar. It all starts with the 80-20 balancer pool token. So there's a balancer liquidity pool on mainnet that is 80% ALCX, 20% ETH. So in order to opt into the VE ALCX system, you have to lock those liquidity tokens in the system. So as a user, the first step you're doing is you're taking this token and you are locking it in. You have a couple options when you do that. So Alchemix we let you go up to a 1-year lock. And so if you lock for 1 year, that means you will immediately be assigned voting power with some multiplier, and that multiplier will decay down to 0 over the year. So if you just lock for 1 year, then don't touch your position for a year, it's going to decay down over a year back to a voting power of 0, and then after a year you will be able to unlock.
Sorry for interrupting you, but I think that we can't really see the translation.
Oh, you can't see my screen?
Yeah, mine also is loading.
Oh, weird. Let me try to unshare and share again.
Turn off the VPN.
Do I even have it? I don't have it on. Did that work?
It's still loading.
Yeah.
Scoopy, do you want to try sharing the front end? I can just keep talking.
Sure. I'll try to share the front end. But you have to stop your stream before I can do that.
Yep. Okay. Try that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Cool. Now
Gotcha.
it works.
Yeah. So yeah, on this front end, so yeah, just kind of going through what the protocol actually does at a high level. So you create a lock. So if Scoopy hits that correct lock button, he has the option to deposit the liquidity token. He can lock it for up to 1 year, which will decay it over 1 year. And decaying basically means that your remaining lock time will go down, but then also your voting power will go down. We've also introduced a Boolean where you can keep max locked. Pain point of a lot of VE systems is you have to continuously re-up your lock if you want to maintain the maximum voting power and maximum lock. We've made that easy within the contracts. You can just opt into just not decaying your voting power. So Scoopy has a lock, I believe, already. And so you can manage that lock position. You can increase the lock. You can extend it. You can claim rewards. You can unlock it. And to unlock, you need the Flux token to unlock early, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's roughly what you can do to get into the system. Once you're in the system, there are a few things that'll happen. First off, you'll be streamed various reward tokens. So you'll get like ALCX, Aura Balancer, ALETH, ALUSD debt repayments, Flux, all these various tokens. And so a key aspect of this system is that the system, if you're familiar with Alchemix at all, it's self-repaying loans, right? And so technically anyone can donate AL assets to your loan to repay your loan faster. So what VE ALCX does is it has the feature built in to melt different reward assets down into AL assets, like ALETH and ALUSD. And then those can be used to repay your loans faster. So if you are an Alchemix user who has an Alchemix loan and are also locked into VE ALCX, you can direct the VE ALCX revenue into repaying your loans. And so there's an aspect of the system that has to handle those tokens, right? Where essentially, if a token is not whitelisted, it'll just pass it straight through to you. So, like for example, if the system is earning balancer tokens and balancer is not whitelisted, then as a VE ALCX user, you will just earn straight balancer tokens. If balancer is a whitelisted asset, then the system will seek to swap balancer into ALETH or ALUSD and then repay your loans. So we can kind of pass through assets, or we can use them to melt down to boost yield for users. The other reward token, and this is kind of one of the bigger changes we've made to the VE system. The other reward token is Flux, and Flux is best described as an ecosystem token in that it gives you a little bit more freedom in how you express like what you think is the most important part of VE ALCX. So if you're locked in VE ALCX, you will earn Flux credit. This Flux credit can be forfeited or burned in order to boost your gauge voting power. And I'll talk about why you want gauge voting power in a little bit, but just know that you can just burn all of your Flux credit and to boost your gauge voting power. Alternatively, you can claim your Flux credit and use it to mint a Flux ERC20. Once Flux is an ERC20, it can no longer be used to boost your gauge voting power. Once it's an ERC20, it has a different purpose, and the purpose is to unlock your VE ALCX position early. So in practice, that means if you're saving up Flux as a VE ALCX user, you can just constantly burn it to boost your gauge voting power, or you can save up Flux and burn it to unlock your VE ALCX position early. Alternatively, if you don't want boosted voting power and if you don't care about unlocking your position, you can sell it on the open market. The reason people would buy it is because they want to unlock their position early and they haven't earned enough Flux yet. So the effect here is that you can either get extra voting power if you really feel strongly about your gauge voting, or it creates this additional source of yield / a market dictated price to unlock your position. So rather than having to set a rage quit value, the market can kind of dictate at any given time what's the actual cost of unlocking, and that cost to unlock is how much Flux do you need to buy to actually unlock your position. So we're pretty excited about the Flux token. Ultimately, the system is designed it's designed to be more of a bonus right now, not necessarily something you rely on. But if we like how it performs in prod, then it may become a more key aspect of the system. I think the last major piece of the user experience here is the gauge voting. And so when you lock in VE ALCX, you have a voting power assigned to you. You're going to get more voting power the longer you lock for. And essentially, so when most people think of gauges, they think of internal gauges, which is like you're a decentralized exchange, right? You send token emissions to your own liquidity pools. Alchemix is not a DEX. What we use emissions for is primarily incentivizing liquidity for our synthetic assets. And so that can be direct incentives on any DEX, that can be vote incentives like sending ALCX to Vodium or Vote Market, any of those hidden hand, any of those bribe platforms or vote incentive platforms. And so VE ALCX has external gauges where each epoch, and I should have clarified at the start, VE ALCX runs off 2-week epochs. So every 2 weeks, your voting power will decay and you'll have to vote on gauges and everything. But every epoch, you will get to vote for gauges, which basically determines where ALCX gets sent externally in order to incentivize liquidity. And so we've developed an external gauge framework where we can hook in, I mean, sometimes it's super simple, right? Like if there's a bribe contract and you just need to send tokens to it every 2 weeks, then the external gauge is simply, hey, VE ALCX, send this many emissions to this contract. Other times, we may need to get a little more complex with it, but ultimately, internal to VE ALCX, all that's really happening is we are dictating which contract to send ALCX to so that we create incentives. Yeah, so as a user, you are dictating how ALCX is used to incentivize various AL asset liquidity. That is the broad overview. I guess I could jump into some more specific stuff right now, if that makes sense. Or we could jump into other questions. What makes the most sense to go to right now? I'll just keep going. So that's the broad overview. So if we're talking about there are a couple kind of complex points of this system, right? The first one is just reward distribution and vote tracking. That's frankly the meat of the system in terms of the amount of lines of code and the complexities and potential things that can go wrong. And then Flux is obviously a very new thing. So that's also kind of a focus of this audit, I think. So, sorry, go ahead. Is someone talking? Nope. Okay.
I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Okay, cool. All good. So to jump in a little bit more to Flux, Flux has a few different parameters. Essentially, the DAO does need to dictate how Flux is emitted, right? So there is a Flux multiplier parameter, which dictates the rate at which Flux accrues. So it's basically how much Flux do you get per VE ALCX per epoch. And then we also dictate the amount of Flux you need in order to fully unlock a max locked VE ALCX position. And then lastly, you also need to set the flux per gauge voting in terms of how much flux do you need to get one extra VE ALCX vote for one epoch. So the boost for flux voting is an amount of VE ALCX. So you're not boosting a percent of your vote, you're just adding an amount of VE ALCX to your vote, whatever that is. And so our intent with Flux currently, and the way we plan to parameterize it at launch, pending DAO approval, is that if you continuously max lock into VE ALCX, then if you burn your Flux claim every single epoch, you will always have a 50% higher vote. So if you are always burning your Flux for gauge votes, you're always going to be able to vote 50% more than you would otherwise. So that means if there are bribes for gauges, you're going to be getting 50% more rewards from those bribes. That also means that you could save up for half the year and then boost your vote by 2x for the remainder of the year. There is a cap on how much you can vote, and that is to prevent people from saving up Flux for a really long time and then blowing it all on one vote for one epoch just to get like all the rewards, because that's unhelpful to the DAO. It's not really the point of the system. You're supposed to be actively participating every epoch and everything. On the unlock side, the intent is that if you hold one VE ALCX on a maximum lock for 4 years, then you would have enough Flux after 4 years to unlock it despite being locked. So the idea here is once you earn enough Flux, that's kind of a permanent ability to unlock your position right away. And so you have to be in the system for quite a while to do that. Otherwise, if you want to unlock earlier, you can let it decay a bit, which will make it a bit cheaper to unlock, or you can buy Flux on the open market.
That's
all
really cool, guys. Thank you. But I think maybe we can a little change our focus a little bit and maybe go on with some code walkthrough.
Yeah. So I think everyone kind of understands the features and the overview now. So maybe Toyvo can just open up the GitHub repo and just kind of walk through which contracts are kind of associated with the various features of what we went through.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for the intro on that, Koala. And I can share my
So I guess
screen.
Scoopy can stop sharing. While we're loading that up, I do see we're starting to get plenty of questions. Start of the boost, so we'll be going through those today. And we're generally starting now onwards is probably when we'll be answering the most questions in terms of time range each day. So yeah, just know that we're reading them all and working through them.
Yeah, so at a high level of the code base, you can think of the voting escrow.sol contract. That's the entry point to the system that manages deposits and withdrawals and voting power. And that is essentially the ERC 721 contract that mints you your VE ALCX NFT. So that kind of manages all of that. And then Paul or Scoopy, feel free to let me know if I should pause for any questions. I don't have both open at the Discord and the Codebase open at the same time. Anyways,
Yeah, sure.
so voting escrow is your main entry point to the system. And Koala mentioned that there are 2-week epochs. So each epoch will be started call of distribute here. This function kicks off the rewards for every epoch and also distributes the rewards to the coinciding gauges. So at the base level, the point of the system is to have ALCX holders earn ALCX emissions as well as rewards for gauges they vote for. And so this minter contract is what controls the emissions of ALCX every epoch. And then it also determines, we have here emissions rates as well as the destinations for those emissions. So for example, your VE ALCX holders will receive ALCX emissions. The Treasury obviously will receive some emissions, as well as the various gauges. And then those will in total make up 100% of the emissions per epoch. Something that's interesting about our voting escrow system is because we are leveraging BPT tokens or balancer pool tokens, we're depositing those into an aura pool to generate rewards for the holders. So that way you don't have to sacrifice both. You don't have to forego getting aura rewards. And so how we do that is through the reward pool manager. And so that reward pool is able to control the deposits into the VE ALCX system, as well as the withdrawals, obviously, but then also the ability to claim rewards from that pool and then distribute them back to rewards holders. And how we kind of touched on it a little bit, but how rewards and revenue are distributed to VE ALCX holders is through this revenue handler. So this revenue handler will be able to take both Alchemix tokens, so that would be your ALETH or your ALUSD, and then melt those down to, or this is actually, sorry, scrap. It could take revenue tokens such as USDC or DAI or ETH, for example, and then that could melt them down to ALETH, ALUSD, and then that's what could pay off your loan if you had an outstanding debt position early, and then as well as handle the passing through of any balancer or any subsequent revenue token in the future. Let's see. Something to note too is that let me go to voter.sol. So when you earn ALCX rewards, something we did not touch on is that you have the ability to claim those ALCX rewards at any time. However, if you just plainly claim them, that you'd have a 50% penalty on those rewards. But if you were to claim them and compound them into your existing position, you would not have that fee at all applied to your claim.
Yeah, I guess to clarify that, your ALCX rewards are on the same decay schedule as the rest of your position. So if you want to claim them early, you would have to do that penalty. But if you want to claim them early and compound, you don't have to pay that penalty.
Yeah. So let's think about what other contracts. So Flux token. So I guess if we're going to go through the contracts here as well. So Flux token obviously is the ERC20 that is the that ecosystem token, and this is the token contract for it. It has it is minted by the voting escrow contract because that's where you would go and claim your Flux tokens. Something to note is that your unclaimed balance is kept track of in this voter.sol contract. And until we kind of mentioned it's burning your flux to vote or boost your vote, but the reality is you're actually just decrementing your accrued amount of flux. And so before it's actually minted, it's not actually obviously like live ERC20. And so at the point of claiming flux that's when it's minted from the voting escrow contract. And then we had a while back some historic NFT holders, and there's a one-time claim for the NFTs that they hold that they'll allow them to get like a portion of Flux just because they provided some value to Alchemix a while back. And then also so I guess to get into the voting system. So we talked about the gauges, and so each gauge also has a bribe contract. Let's go to and so every new gauge is also going to spin up a bribe contract. And so we have the gauge factory as well as a bribe factory, so that allows those to get spun up in tandem. And you'll see that within like a lot of the gauge management, a lot of the voting management, or all of the gauge management, all of the voting management is managed through the voter.sol contract. So that manages the creation as well as the accounting of votes per voting period. Let's see. And then yeah, we have a generic base gauge and a base bribe contract, and those are what those factories are spinning up each time. So you can think of the pass-through gauge. Here's an example of a simple gauge contract, and so that is just implementing this pass-through rewards function. And so for this one, for example, like if it's a sushi gauge, all it needs to do is receive rewards, and so at the end of the day, it just needs to pass through an ERC20 token. But yeah, that kind of covers the contracts at a higher level. Anyone have any questions so far, or anything they want me to touch on some more?
Sorry, did you touch on the revenue handler?
Yes, yeah, the revenue handler.
Okay, never mind. Yeah.
Yeah, passing through arbitrary as well as alchemic tokens.
Do we have an example of a gauge right now that would do something more than just send tokens to an address, or is that just the version we have right now?
Yeah, we have a curve gauge right now that is Flux that is handles logic to work with Vodium. I don't think that we're going to necessarily be using Vodium at the time of launch, but it's an example of a gauge that could implement a different logic within this pass-through rewards function. I guess something to note is that it would be Alchemix's role to manage any third-party gauges that might be different from gauge to gauge. Like it's not able to arbitrarily be made by a external party, for example.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
guess
it's
something
up to. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. And then something to note too for your ALCX position. You obviously can manage that position by depositing BPT to increase your voting power. You can update your the length of your position as well, but also you can delegate your voting power to a third party, and then they could vote on your behalf. And then as well as like you could technically have your deposits managed by a third party as well, and so anyone could deposit to your existing ALCX position. I saw there was already an issue that was raised, but the issue fundamentally just touches on the fact that anyone can deposit if they're feeling generous to your existing position, just the same as you could transfer an ERC20 to anyone.
Cool. Thank you for your presentation. And Is this all the important parts of the system you really wanted to show to the whiteheads today?
Yeah, so I guess and then in terms of just and as you're digging into the contract, something that is helpful that I use a lot is obviously there's a lot of Foundry commands to keep track of. I use a makefile just to make things really easy for myself. So that way you can test things on a specific block or test things on a specific file as needed. So I would take a look at this makefile, and it just kind of gives you a quick TLDR on how to test the system without having to run every single test every time. The voting escrow contract is going to be the largest contract. So if you run into instances where your tests are running a little bit slow or something like that, maybe just try running either a single file at a time, or even a single test at a time. But yeah, otherwise that kind of touches at a high level the main components of the all the components of the code base.
Yeah, those files will be like really helpful for the whiteheads here, I think. Thank you for telling about them today.
Yeah, no problem.
I think that we can go on, and I'll ask you some more specific question about the project and its technical side. And
Sounds
after
good.
that, we can have maybe the Q&A session with all the audience that is here with us now today.
Sounds good.
Yep. So I have a few questions actually. So you said that this is a brand new system to Alchemix, but is it like an upgrade of something that ever existed before? And what are the main differences between if it was an upgrade of something that was before? Which kind of new features you implemented here?
Yeah, I can touch on those, and then Koala, if you want to fill in anything I miss. So you could think of, I think some comparable voting escrow systems would be Velodrome. They're using an NFT-based system, as well as which Velodrome I think was initially a fork of Solidly. So, but the main difference there is they have a NFT ERC 721 based voting escrow system. The main difference is that they have internal gauges as they have like liquidity pools. Our gauges are just basically means in which to pass through ALCX rewards to external sources or external contracts. And then also, obviously, just the main glaring difference would be the ability to pass through revenue, as well as manage your unlocking and voting with Flux.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess this may be a good time to touch on in our version, how do we handle people who don't vote every epoch? In that, like, their vote remains, right? But what happens?
Yeah. You want me to quick touch on that, Koala?
Yeah, because I don't think I fully remember.
Yeah. So I mean, at a very high level, obviously the system keeps track of your voting power, and what makes up that voting power is the amount that you have deposited, as well as the duration of the time that you have locked your ALCX for. And so those two factors keep track of your voting power. Those are obviously time dependent, which are kept track of in relation to, ETH mainnet. And so in order for your voting power to decay, you have to then participate in voting, which triggers the accounting functions in order to decay your vote over time. And so the immediate question that raises is, then could I just never decay my voting power? And the answer is yes, but then you'd be unable to then receive rewards on a epoch to epoch basis. You'd still always be eligible for your ALCX rewards, but in order to receive rewards for voting and participating in the voting system, you'd have to be participating or delegating your vote to a party that participates on your behalf. And that applies as well as to your accrual of Flux, because it's all voting incentive based.
So I believe that's a little different than Velo as well. Flux external gauges, slight difference in how we handle voting power, and then revenue
Yeah.
would be the main differences.
Cool. Thank you for the answer. It's like really interesting. So maybe now we can switch to the security aspect of the system, because I'm really interested in like which part of the code do you think are highly likely to contain any bugs?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess the go ahead, Koala.
Yeah, I just wanted to give some context here first. Is so yeah, this project started kind of as a velodrome fork, and then we realized we wanted to change a lot of things, so it kind of became its own project that also inherited some of the velodrome code base, which made it a bit of a beast. So we put it through its first audit, and that's kind of when we realized, like, hey, this is a more complex code base than we initially intended. And so we did an audit with chain security. That audit is actually shared as part of this bounty program, so you can actually read all the previous bugs that we have that have been found. And so before finalizing the audit with them, we wanted to separately put it through this Immunefi competition, just to really make sure we're catching everything and can submit something we think is fully ready to go after this contest. So that's the context, and then Toyvo can talk about some of the specific bugs or focus areas.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the accounting of things on chain is always an innately tricky problem in terms of accounting, in terms of not funds, but in power and voting on chain. And so with that, probably the part of the code base that has the most potential, or I guess that should never break, is the ability for someone to either vote with more power than they have, or because that has trickle down effects in terms of being able to claim rewards, and also affecting what gauges get bribes and so forth. So that, I guess, the accounting of both voting as well as receiving rewards has potentially the biggest impact on the system.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. And well, I think this question is also related to the previous one, but like, what kind of roles do you have in your system? Because there's a lot of bugs involving, like, for example, privilege escalation or some similar vulnerabilities. So I think it will be very useful for the whiteheads to actually know what kind of roles do you have.
Yeah, good question. I mean, so at a base level, your external roles are going to be just the ASCX holders. Those are like the users of the system, and that kind of basically entails voting, managing your deposits, as well as managing your time locked if you want to either extend that or burn Flux to unlock early. And then outside of participants in the system, we have an admin role, which that would be a multi-sig to start. We obviously are working towards a path of decentralization, and so that would eventually move to being governance contracts. And so that admin has the ability to update state variables such as like Flux boosting power, as well as just other and like gauge management, things like that. But you'll see that admin, and you can just assume that is either like a multi-sig, or you can just, I think, chalk that up to governance as a whole would be the admin in that sense.
Thank you for the answer. And so, yeah, you have roles. I suppose that any action that involves any report that involves an action from privileged status is classically out of scope.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, because they just
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, if it's like, I believe we're going to launch these contracts upgradable, at least at the start too, because historically with larger code bases, you find small issues. I mean, you have the Immunefi pro. We're going to have this in scope for Immunefi after the boost as well. And so at least at the start, it will all be upgradable, which kind of means you're trusting and in any way not to maliciously upgrade. But yeah, the assumption is the multi-sig will be the admin to start, and then that admin is not malicious.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any external dependencies in your project?
Yes.
Yeah, so the external dependencies mainly here would be the bouncer pool, because that locks underlying ALCX liquidity, as well as the Aura pool, where we are depositing and withdrawing funds from. I guess as well
And
as
they're
we
also,
have-
of course, considered out of scope, as I understand.
correct. Yeah, those would be out of scope.
Cool. Cool. Any unusualities, because they are usually causing like a lot of problems and a lot of issues, that any unusual stuff that can maybe confuse whiteheads?
Yeah, so in order to manage the who is able to claim bribes for a given epoch, there is both tracking of participants that participate on a per epoch basis, as well as participants who have voted as a whole. And so you could think of the participant who votes on epoch 1, and they would earn their rewards for that epoch. But if they do not participate in epoch 2, but they don't update their vote, they'd still be voting for a given gauge. But a user who participates in epoch 2 would be able to claim the bribes from epoch 2. So that accounting, I guess, can be confusing in terms of who is eligible and not eligible for rewards. But the main through line there is that only participants in voting are then eligible for the rewards that come from voting.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I think that's it with the questions. So maybe we can go on and maybe ask our audience to send some questions in the chat, so the guys can answer them with their beautiful voices. Let's wait until our audience come up with something interesting.
Joyboy asked if the scope of the Sherlock contest is related to this boost. No, it is not. We just did a Sherlock contest for our bridging contracts for our AL assets on layer 2, as well as a reward distributor, but that is entirely separate from this. A list of main invariants, toyvo already shared those. But I guess for people listening to the recording, the main invariants are: a user should never be able to claim more bribes than they have earned. A user should never be able to claim more revenue than they have earned. A user should never be able to claim more rewards than they have earned. And a user should never be able to vote with more power than they have. Unless they burn Flux to do it, of course.
Okay, there are some questions going on.
Are there any written docs? No, there are no separate docs. I believe, toyvo, you've gone through pretty heavily and commented on the code, right? Is there a specific place people need to go to see that, or is it just reading through the comments?
Yeah,
There's
so
a doc gen. Yeah.
this is a docgen command you can run as well if you want to run the documentation locally within the code base. That'll be helpful, and that basically will just generate the NatSpec documentation.
And again, for people listening to the recording, the command is make space docs _ local.
We have an interesting question, like, is there any diagram or visualization of the architecture?
We do
Please.
not have a current up-to-date one that on hand. No.
Is okay.
Yeah, I'll read it out. So this CLI command that we were like talking before, the make space docs _ local, is same as the nut spec in the code. So for anybody actually listening to the recording. And since there's no more people typing in the chat, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you guys for coming to this event and actually providing a lot of useful data for the whiteheads, I bet. I bet this boost will be amazing for you. And good hunting, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having
Thank
us.
you so much, everyone.